Good morning. Welcome to this week's episode of The VUU, where we're going to be talking about Sparks of Wonder and their amazing authors. But before we get there, my name is Aisha Hauser, and I'm in Seattle, Washington. And it is gray and rainy, as usual. Christina Rivera, how are you and where are you? And how's the weather where you are?
I'm Christina Rivera, and I'm coming to you all from Charlottesville, Virginia, where it is also overcast and icky and really, really cold. Just it's winter. It slid back into winter. There was some promise of spring there that was just unusual for January, but it really is winter. I just have to deal with it. Michael, how you doing?
Good morning, everyone. This is Michael Tino joining you from Mount Kisco, New York. I'm okay. I'm getting over a cold, which my daughter gave me. I'm a little harried. I put her on the bus this morning, and as soon as the bus drove away, I realized that I didn't give her a snack for her after-school program, which, if you've ever met my 6-year-old when she's hangry, you know that everybody in the after school program appreciates the fact that I took time on the way here to stop at the school and drop off a snack. So it's just one of those weeks. I want to cancel this week and start over. But I'm here and it's looking better already because I see beautiful people in front of me. And Lori Stone Sirtosky, you are doing tech again this week because Antonia Bell-Delgado is still at Meadville Lombard taking classes. How are things in Phoenix?
It's a beautiful day here. I am looking at probably the last week of my Celtic prayer flags hanging in the sun. I just got notice from my HOA that we can't have decorations on our balcony. So I'm very sad about that, but I'm enjoying the last week of it. Beautiful, beautiful purples and blues and pinks flying in my view right now. Sun coming through and the buttes in the background, Papago Buttes. So I'm blessed with a really lovely view. I will be today over on Twitter and in Facebook and on YouTube monitoring the chat. So join us on YouTube. You can find the link in our Facebook event or on our feed in Twitter. And we will be, I will pass the whatever you guys comment on back into the panelists chat windows so they can interact with you. So we love to have our live viewers join us. Also remember that we will be posting this to our podcast feed afterward. And I'm looking forward to Tonya getting back from Meadville. I know that everybody is there. We have several seminarians from our fellows program there in Meadville this week and month in the cold Chicago winter with intensives. So looking forward to having them all back soon.
Yes, awesome. So this week, the UUA Board of Trustees is meeting in Boston. What do they meet? 3 times a year in person? 4? 9? I don't know. I should pay more attention. 4.
GA, yeah.
And then and the Unitarian Universalist Association is hiring a national campaign coordinator to UU the vote. So if you are interested, go on the UUA website, and they're hiring someone in Wisconsin, which I think is a brilliant idea. And what else is happening in UU land?
So the UUA came out with a new video promoting General Assembly, which is really, really fun. I encourage everybody to take the, 90 seconds to watch it. We've got a link on it here in the show notes. It's really great to see the work that the GAPC, General Assembly Planning Committee, and the Conferences Committee are doing around GA this year. It looks really, to me, it looks different than the previous work being done to promote and to give people more, try and give people more accessibility to General Assembly, including the payment plan that was offered and opening up registration early. So shout out to them for doing that, and take a look at the video. You'll see lots of faces. I'm sure almost everybody will see a face that they recognize.
And the UUA announced this week a new hire, Anna Bethay, Director of
Lifespan
Thank you.
engagement.
Lifespan Faith Engagement Life, the director of Life, which is great. The board game and Life. That's awesome. Anna Bethay is amazing and one of just our most talented religious educators, and I'm really excited.
Yeah.
Michael, yeah.
Who can tell me what that means?
Lifespan
Lifespan faith engagement.
So I would probably refer you back to the people who came up with it. They no, for reals, they were really trying to change it. So it used to be the Faith Development Office, right? And they were really trying to rebrand it with when they decided to populate it and really try and figure out what it make most sense for them to be doing as a department and also individuals within the department. So we saw the exit of Art Frost. We saw, the Youth and Young Adult Office basically eliminated in terms of an office in itself, but the duties still there amongst different staff members. But what they really said they wanted was, they definitely wanted the idea of lifespan in there. They felt it was really important that we think of faith formation as something that happens over someone's life, not just children. And they wanted, of course, the word faith in there. And the engagement part really became because they were trying to find something that was active, that wasn't just about education, wasn't like something that was being done to somebody, but that somebody was actively participating in. And so that's how they came up with engagement. It was a long and arduous process, I'm told, of coming up with the name. So we're wishing them.
I totally appreciate that, Christina. Thank you. And Kiana Perkins has already written in that she too has been wanting to know what that title meant. And, I think sometimes there's great vision and like insight into what our congregations need and how we're going to staff for those needs. And like people have really thought about this and hired someone who's really an exciting person for this exciting role without saying, oh, here's what this role is now. So I totally appreciate that. Thank you for explaining.
Yeah, I didn't know. Thank you, Chris. I
mean, full disclosure, I interrogated them pretty closely about.
I expected that you would have.
I was like, what's going on? You're eliminating Youth and Young Adult Office. You're, changing roles. You're, you're changing your name. Like, you all need to be a little bit more transparent about what this all means and how it's going to play out, particularly for religious educators, because that is one of the offices that we go to most for resources. And, being resourced as a religious educator is, at times a precarious thing. And so, I think it's perfectly within our covenant to really ask those difficult questions.
Yeah, I thank you, because I 10 years ago now worked for the UUA when it was 3 iterations ago of that department. And so, yeah, conversations when we're together make perfect sense. And then we don't realize they don't quite translate fully to everyone. So I really appreciate the framing, and it actually makes a lot of sense. It just would have been helpful to, I don't know, put that somewhere because I didn't understand either. It's like, okay, it's a nice title. So if there's nothing else in UU land, we're going to go to one of the brand new books in UU.
Lori has
one. Sorry, Lori.
So one of our members, Darby Lockridge, last week, based on the show we did about socially responsible investing, has taken it upon herself to gather petitions to get the CLF to also be a sponsoring congregation. And she is looking for a few more signatures. So go over to our coffee hour, or you can email me at Sirtosky, LSIRTOSKY at CLFUU.org. And I'll be sure to hook you up so that you can sign on to be one of those, so that the CLF as a congregation can be one of the sponsoring organizations and congregations for the business resolution at GA this year that will encourage all of us in the Unitarian Universalist sphere to, and particularly the UUA, to be more, take our human rights around the world into account when we are making our investments of our money.
Fabulous. This show inspires faith in action. Woohoo! The VUU. So I'm going to introduce our guests today. Becky Brooks is a religious educator and writer who makes her home in Baltimore, Maryland. She served as Director of Religious Education at the First Unitarian Church of Baltimore. Beautiful congregation, visit, I would recommend, for 8 years before pulling back from congregational work to focus on writing and creating tools for congregations to deepen connection and relationship. I can very much relate to that, Becky. Do you want to wave for everyone to let us know? There you are. Hi, Becky. Erika Hewitt. Hi, Erika. Met Becky Brooks 20 years ago. I didn't even know that about you both. When they were students at Star King School for the Ministry, and they struck up a creative educational collaboration that continues to this day. Today, Erika divides her ministry between serving as pastor of a small UU congregation on the coast of Maine and serving our Unitarian Universalist Association as minister of worship arts. And she wonders if everyone listening, watching has already downloaded the free Worship Web app available on both Apple and on Android. And I want to name that I preached at Erika's congregation in Maine this summer, and I loved it. Oh, there it is. Erika, do you want to tell us a little bit about that? You could start us off.
Sure, I'll tell you. Oh, hang on. Yeah, I will tell you about this. This app is available on Android and on Apple, and it is about to include, I guess this is kind of a news announcement. It is about to include the Light Your Own Chalice. Doesn't have it yet, but for it has quick links to the Worship Web just main page, to Braver Wiser, which is the weekly spirituality series, to our Black Lives Matter collection, and then to all kinds of different genres, including a little blank box, which is a little bit of an Easter egg, which takes you to our What's New page. And it also includes all of the images that exist on Worship Web, which is uua.org/images. And they're slowly loading. But this app is offered by the Unitarian Universalist Association in appreciation of all of the congregational and individual support that we receive. So in other words, you do not have to pay for it because of the generosity of individuals and congregations who have supported us. So that's, it's just Worship Web, all one word, for folks who want to download it.
I'm so excited that the chalice lighting is coming back.
Yeah.
That is like the part that I missed. Well,
I
not the
know.
most, but I'm sure just people had to be asking for it all the time, because I remember many times looking at my phone for the chalice lighting in the previous app. So thank you so much, and for including that. We're excited.
Oh, we knew from the beginning we had to really, really work on it. It requires a lot more technology than the rest of the, the images and chalice lightings and prayers and whatnot.
Awesome. So, and Lori has added the link in our show notes. So Becky, do you want to start us off with, here is the book, Sparks of Wonder, and the genesis of this book, and tell us what it's about.
Sure, absolutely. Well, to start with, it's kind of funny. Erika and I started talking about this book in 2015. So this book is old. It's a lot older than it seems for a new book. But part of what we were talking about in our initial conversations is, there were a lot of resources for congregations doing theme ministry that were fledgling, sort of, things that now everybody knows about were getting started around about then. And one of the things that Erika and I were talking about is coming up with a resource that, an inexpensive resource that really addressed how to do theme ministry in your congregations across the whole congregation. So, so not just in worship, not just for covenant groups or small groups for adults, but really stuff you can do with kids, stuff you can do with people from any corner of your congregation. And I think of the way we did the book, I think that the thing I'm most proud of is that there's really something in here for everybody. So if your congregation is doing theme ministry, or even if they're not, which we'll probably talk about later, there's really something to connect with and to build relationships with fellow congregants around, no matter what corner of the congregation you're serving in, whether you're just a person in the pews or whether you're involved in social justice, whether you're involved in religious education, whether you're in the choir, all of that stuff. So I think
I
that's
also
my
want to
main
name
thing.
that I love that you add movie ideas for each
Yes,
theme. Like
yes,
you're
I love
adding
movies.
all.
Becky's
And-
a master at that.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
Not just like, here, watch this movie, but like discussion questions for all ages, and like, you know, taking like a movie like Prince of Egypt and like really unpacking and yeah, Becky's so good at that.
Yeah, I love that.
Which means, you mean, Becky's talking about your role in the congregation, and it's true. There's a resource for you for any role in the congregation, but also we crammed this full of stuff for like, you know, parents or for individuals. Like there's also a section for each theme on spiritual practice. So it could be just you thinking, well, how do I want to introduce some like depth, or well, maybe I want to invite the friends over for a movie night. So it doesn't even have to be in the congregation.
That's a very good point, actually, and especially you have a chapter. I opened it this morning to just see what would come up, and it's the one on humility. You have a whole. I'm like, oh yay! This just needs to be our 9th principle after we pass the 8th principle. Is that we will strive for humility. How did you pick the themes?
I like Becky's language best about this. Becky, do you know what I'm talking about? So this was again 5-6 years ago. We brainstormed a really big list, and we asked ourselves which ones we were a little afraid of. And so there are 5 here, and we're working on a part 2 that has a different 5 themes. But we chose the 5 themes that most were like, dare, if you dare, come play with us. But then what I really like about what we did is the theme of humility. We talk about in the introduction how it really comes to life and has more texture when you add like a complementary theme. So for humility, it's not knowing. And we do that for each of the themes. It's not just like humility, 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 but we sort of offer a frame that I really like.
I think that movie recommendation was How to Tame Your Dragon. Am I right? Which I love. Do you want to name why you picked that one? But I haven't seen that movie. My children are young adults, so they stopped
totally
coming to movies like that with me when they were like 10. They were like, nope, you're on your own with this one, Mom. So
yeah, How to Train Your Dragon was the movie that I picked for that. I mean, you all have no idea how many movies were on all of these lists. Oh boy, I had to really narrow it down. Part of it, honestly, was How to Train Your Dragon was my daughter's favorite movie for like 5 years. But I think it actually has a really spectacular message of humility, because I don't know if you know the movie, but basically what happens is the sort of main character of the movie, his village wars against the dragons, and the dragons are this big threat, and he doesn't want to fight. He's not a fighter, and he has this encounter with a very rare dragon, and he accidentally hurts the dragon. He doesn't actually mean to, and so they meet together, and he is put in a situation where he and this single dragon have to have this kind of meeting of the minds, where instead of being warriors, they get curious about each other and they learn about each other. And in some ways, that's actually a really common theme in movies for kids and for young people, that as adults, we sort of, oh, they're movies for kids. But actually, if you kind of rewind a little bit, you think, well, what if we watched this movie? And this is true of all the movies that I picked for the book. If we watch this movie and think of it through a lens of, wow, what can this teach me about my adult relationships, and really take it seriously? I think there's a lot there, to be humble as an adult, to look at this art for kids and say, actually, that's a really wonderful message. And if I think about it in that way, it's great. Politically, you can impress on all sorts of political situations this message that's ostensibly for kids, but really, if we all paid more attention, we'd do better. So I really love How to Train Your Dragon, and it's one of my favorites.
What I love is Becky's final reflection question on page 52. Well, it's a set of questions, but the question is, how do you want to be changed? Like that transcends this movie, and it conveys the whole sense of willingness to be changed, right? In fact, we just sang in my the congregation I serve, we just sang Brian Wren's hymn number 23, Bring Many Names. And I think one of my favorite lines in that hymn is about young, growing God, eager to, willing to be changed by what you've started, right? And may we never, as we age, lose that capacity for willing to be changed. So good job on that question, Becky.
What I love about how accessible this book is to me, it speaks to the search for truth and meaning that's not, not focused on Emerson and Thoreau and the Transcendentalists. Like now I want to see How to Tame Your Dragon. I mean, there's an accessibility that I love to inspire and communicate to folks when engaging in faith formation with teachers. So naming that actually we can get inspired by what's around us. And that's what I appreciate one of those that thread in this book. Was there a movie that you wanted, Becky and Erika's like, there's no way we're ever going to talk about? I'm just curious. I'm also a movie buff, but clearly I don't think I've seen as many, definitely as Chris. I have not, but I do enjoy them.
I hope, Erika, you don't mind me saying, I think this was the one area of the book that Erika was like, you just go do that.
Because you've been doing this and amazing. So Becky's been writing movie recommendations for me since I was a religious educator in 2004. So it's not like I just dumped this task on her.
In a good way.
She's the expert in our creative partnership.
But it was so fun.
So Erika, what spoke to you the most? What was your, not movies. So what was the thing that you were like, oh, no, I want this to be my thing, or this is what brings me alive?
Well, I have a lot of fun with worship, and I have a lot of fun with cracking open the traditional worship structure. And a lot of people know my name because of a book called Story, Song, and Spirit, which is worship services for all ages. But I wanted to not necessarily make all 5 worship services in this book worship for all ages, and Becky did co-write these. I really wanted to include worship services that were non-traditional, that were aimed at adults, maybe youth and adults. So I got super excited about that. And one of them is in the Journey chapter. It's called I Will Be With You. And it's I don't know why I nerd out about this, but I love the research on the historical Jesus. My dad is a Methodist minister and biblical scholar who was actually a member of the Jesus Seminar. So I grew up in my teens and young adult years, sort of by osmosis, getting a lot of that. And so I wrote with Becky's input and a lot of help from readers. Michael was one of them. I wrote a passion play in which Jesus never appears, but it is a conversation among his followers during the week of his entry into Jerusalem and his persecution. And that's the sort of thing I get really excited about knowing that in our movement, there are many people who don't really know how to approach Jesus, don't know how they feel about the fact that maybe we should be talking about Jesus and his ministry around Easter. So I really, really had fun with that.
What's the movie that goes with that chapter? I'm curious.
Journey.
Yeah.
The Wiz live on NBC, which was phenomenal. I don't know if you saw it. I personally watched The Wiz in the theater when it came out or when it was revived, and it scared the pants off me when I was a little kid for some reason. I don't know. Michael Jackson, very threatening. I have no idea, but it really was scary. And then I revisited it as an adult and realized how amazing it is as a cover of The Wizard of Oz. And then when they did the live version of The Wiz on NBC not that long ago, it had just happened when we wrote the book. Now it was years ago. It was just really extraordinary. I hope people will watch it.
But we can use the original one if we want to.
Yes, absolutely. All the questions, well, most of the questions. But if you haven't seen the NBC version, you've got to see it. The cast alone is phenomenal.
So can you tell us more about how you envision congregations using this, or small groups or online groups, or like what, when you were writing it, what was your vision for how people would engage with it?
Let me say something about that, and then Erika can say.
No, I was going to say, you go.
Well, the thing I want to mention, because it's not obvious from the book or really much of the publicity about the book, is that when we ended up with such a big book, we didn't intend for it to be quite so overstuffed initially, but when we did, because there's so many great resources in it, one of the things we realized is that it's not necessarily obvious how to use the book in your congregation. And so we went back and we wrote a series of guides for church leaders. And all of those are in the back. I forget, each one is like 6 pages. Mm-hmm. And so I'm actually hoping that when somebody from a congregation gets the book, they actually start at the end. And they say, okay, I'm a small group leader. Maybe you are leading the choir, maybe you lead a covenant group. And then you go to the back and there's a section that's just called Guide for Small Group Leaders. And what it does is it's like a little tour where there's a little explanation, and then it takes you through each of the types of resources we have. So a worship service, theological reflection, which I hope Erika will talk more about later too. It takes you through each of the elements that we include in each chapter. And it talks about what you can do in your role in your congregation to use the resources in the book. So there's a guide for small group leaders, there's a guide for youth group leaders, there's a guide for religious educators for children and religious educators for adults. Those are separate. There's one for families, a guide for families on how to use that just at home, and then worship leaders, etc. So I'm kind of hoping that if people get the book, they'll figure out that if you start in the back and you look, it's sort of like a set of shortcuts on where to start with digesting the resources in the book.
Yeah, I also think that we're hoping that's one entree on like threshold into the book. I think we're also hoping that people trust themselves enough to understand that just because, let's say, there's a theme that that's humility, like Aisha, that's the one that you mentioned. And if you look at your congregational year and you say, oh, we're not doing humility, I guess we can't do this. Well, we know that people are creative and clever and able to manipulate things. So for example, CLF, Faith Rocket, are doing integrity, right, in the month of May. And like, we know that there will be people who will be able to think, oh, well, humility and being willing to not know, and the question, how do you want to be changed? How do you want your community to be changed? That could fit in really well with integrity. So whether it's just choosing the parable or whether it's using how to train your dragon, we know that some people will look beyond just the one word that we've given to the theme and really explore it.
I want to name, Becky, as you were talking, I actually opened the guide for home study and families with children, the theme of God. So here's what I love about the first question. Talk about the idea of God. What isn't God and what is God? So the depth of this, I'm appreciative of, and this, like you said, can be used in any setting. Do you want to talk about the theological framing and reflections? Again, I just love that you have what isn't God, because there's so many ideas of what is. So I love that you started with that. I appreciate that.
I think we want to talk about two things. I'll talk about the theological reflection, but I'm really excited to also then have Becky talk about what she and I decided to call the social ethic, which is the faith in action. The like, how do I make this come alive in my life? So just briefly, one of the things that I'm aware of, especially in my role at the Unitarian Universalist Association, is there are a good number of our congregations that don't have full-time ministry or don't have professional religious leadership at all. And so the theological reflection, it could be used as a homily. They're designed to be a little homily length, but they're also a way to sort of get people thinking about or to witness us thinking about how this idea of chaos or power or journey, what that has to do with our faith, what that has to do with our spiritual development, what that has to do with the ways that we connect our values to our being in the world. And what we decided really clearly about God, which is the fifth theme, the last chapter, is to be frank, we weren't interested in trying to defend or justify our choice of that. Like, we're just offering it. Here's some ways to reflect on the great mystery that is beyond all names. And that includes the social ethic piece. And Becky, do you want to talk about the social ethic, whether it's related to the God chapter or not?
Yeah, I'd love to actually. As we thought about how to make this resource applicable for all the different roles in congregations, it was a little tricky to think about social justice in terms of, you know, so many congregations. What social justice is very localized. And it's very product oriented. You know, we're getting ready for this march, or we're raising money for this particular thing. And so we struggled a little figuring out how to do that. And eventually, partly inspired by all of what was going on at the time around this idea of allyship. What does it mean to be an ally? Can you be an ally? Well, no, you have to do allyship. And so part of what we wanted to focus on was the process. How do we transform ourselves as people, individually and as communities? So what we came up with was this idea of a social ethic for each theme. And basically what that is instead of talking about particular issues, we let a theme kind of bloom into some practice that a person can do in their life to be changed to the end eventually of social justice, but really it's about changing ourselves. So what the social ethic chapter looks like is there'll be a social ethic that I'll name. So I put some of these in here. So for example, the social ethic for journey is a journey related social ethic asks us to journey with an open mind, allowing ourselves to be guided by curiosity. And so if you think of an ethic or a guiding principle of curiosity, what the social ethic chapter of the book does, section of the book does, is it's filled with discussion questions, activities, role plays. Some of them are like craft activities, because we really want this to be applicable for all ages. And I say that not because kids like crafts, but because adults need excuses to do things like that. Both. But to kind of really give people hands-on, minds-on experience with crafting a practice in their life around changing their ethics, really changing what helps them make choices. So, so for example, curiosity, hopefully if a congregation is doing that work, they're putting together workshops, resources to take home, etc., to help people really build that practice in their lives. And at the end of each social ethics section, there are actually a couple of different like suggested ways to put together the activities that are included, so that all you have to do is turn to that page and plan that out. There's like little syllabuses. So for each one, it's like, if you want to do a half-day workshop for families in your congregation, here are some choices about, here's how you can put together these activities to do this. Here's an opening reading. Here's, so it's hopefully a little, it's accessible, I guess. Aisha, you used that word earlier, and that's really where we hoped we were going with that.
Oh, I want you both to speak to an unexpected, and I certainly appreciate, theme: chaos. It's one of the first, it made it in the first book. So I'd love you both to speak to the theme of chaos.
Wait, do you want me to start? Here's what I love most about the chaos chapter. Remember back at the beginning of this conversation, I said we felt like it would be too flat and too static for the theme to be a standalone theme that we defined a bunch of ways. And what we wanted to do to make the theme dynamic is to add a secondary theme that helps like give it resonance. So what I love about the chaos chapter is the sub-theme is boundaries. So, and how important healthy boundaries are, and how loving it can be to say no. So we didn't say, chaos is always bad or chaos is always good. We just had a lot of fun coming up with, and by the way, there's a section for each theme, readings and quotations. So I just want to say, this is not at all Erika and Becky, Erika and Becky, Erika and Becky. But for example, we have a beautiful reading by Reverend Teresa Soto in the chaos chapter. We have lots and lots of quotes from Tina Fey, from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. But anyway, for us, we wanted to play with what chaos feels like, and how we respond to it in our lives, and what it means when boundaries appear that keep our relationships healthier and more whole. What would you say about it, Becky?
I mean, I think part of it is just really about naming. As we were picking themes and thinking about what was a little risky, there's something really important about just saying, look, this is stuff we have to deal with in our lives. God is something we have to deal with in our lives, whether it's conversations with family members or internal discernment or whatever. Chaos is something we have to deal with in our lives, and so part of, I think, each one of the themes comes out of that sense of, let's be real, let's really engage with important things.
So since we talked about 2 of the 5 themes, why don't you just go ahead and name the other 3?
Sure. So we start with humility, and then the second theme we explore is journey, and then we go to chaos, and then power, and then God is the final theme in this book. Those are the 5.
I feel like each of those themes, can we name the sub themes too? Because I feel like they also center around certain stories, and the journey chapter, the sub theme, the secondary theme that gives it a lot of texture is the notion of callings, and a UU lay leader named Virginia Bobrow, who's a doula and a famous birth coach, helped us, shared with us a telling of the Inanna story. So we have not just a time for all ages for each theme, but a parable. And Virginia worked with us in presenting what is one of the oldest stories recorded in human history. And so so anyway, callings felt really important to name there. And we named the sub-theme of chaos as boundaries, and power. What's the secondary theme for power? Do you remember?
I feel like I should.
Oh, attention, paying attention.
Paying attention.
Oh my God, yeah. And then I think we let the God theme just sort of stand on its own. But we talked a lot about naming. So there's a lot in that chapter about the power of naming. Did we answer your question, Aisha, or did I get?
Oh yeah, I just wanted to, since we were talking about the first two of the five, I figured I might as well just name for everyone else or the other three. Michael, you have something?
So this book is rich. It is lovely and beautiful and rich, and I'm excited to hear that there's a book 2 already in the works. Great. But here's what I'm wondering. It seems like this model that you're putting out there is encouraging congregations to form teams of people that are integrating different parts of the ministry of the congregations, worship and religious education and social action and theological reflection and small groups. And I love it. And I'm wondering if you could speak to, okay, if we do this, if we use this resource, do you think that our team will be able to create some of these things on our own when we're done? So rather than like, okay, I'm just going to wait till book 2 comes out and then use all the resources that you put together for me, I'm hoping that using this resource will train especially lay people in the congregation to be able to do that work, to be able to have a retreat and say, we want to work on this theme. How do we do that? And then they think, oh, well, what movies do we know? Or what's our social ethic, right? Like I love that there are these categories that people can think about. Oh, what is the theological reflection? Is there a sense that is part of what you want to do too, or
I would say absolutely.
your work that you might do to push us in that direction, Becky?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. I think part of, before we even proposed the book, something that I was doing at the First Unitarian Church of Baltimore was working with my RE groups in basically having covenant group for kids, where we had a theme, we came up with questions, we came up with activities to, because more than the content that was available in the curriculum that would work for our size groups, we really wanted to focus on building connection across generations. And so that practice of, hey, covenant groups for kids is a thing we can do, really sort of fed into this, the theme ministry work that then grew into what Erika and I were doing. And I think that for people who are living every day in congregations, on the one hand, it's really challenging to come up with content. It's difficult, it's time consuming, it's hard. And at the same time, with templates, the people who are serving in congregations are very creative. And if you are able to, in your congregation, build a practice that says, okay, every month or for whatever duration you have, every theme, we're going to be coming up with a social ethic, to use that example. I don't think it's so much that it's difficult work to come up with the creative piece, the social ethic. The difficult work is the congregation understanding themselves as a people who does that thing. And so, Michael, I love the way you put it. Ideally, yes, if congregations can get in the practice of understanding themselves as communities that do these pieces, whatever pieces work best for making connection in them, then the creative part is actually not the hard part. I mean, it's the hard part when you're writing a book. It was real hard, but in terms of congregational life, yeah, I definitely think that establishing the practice can do wonders for the community.
I have a different take on it. Not to disagree, but to the two threads that you're talking about that I want to lift up, that we name over and over, is it's really Becky and I come to everything we do within Unitarian Universalism, understanding the foundation as being our relationships, and the question of how can we be in more authentic, trusting relationship with one another? How do we reach that place of being willing to trust and take risks and learn together? So I think the very nature, so that's what my interest is. Again, I am no longer, I wouldn't call myself an educator in the way that Becky is, the way that Chris is, the way that Aisha is. So I think more than anything, this, the resources here invite people to explore new ways of being in relationship. Because even if you're putting together a worship service for all ages, like there's a funny one in here called the Queen's Loaves. To me, it's not about a polished performance. To me, it's about people of all ages having fun and learning that they can delight and be playful together and see themselves as leaders. So for me, it's more about what Becky hinted at in how can the people within our congregations use this stuff as a vehicle for knowing one another. And for really regarding one another and companioning one another.
I have a question for you. You guys mentioned that one of the ways you discerned which topics, which themes to include in the first book was which ones kind of gave you the butterflies, gave you a little bit of fear, or you wanted to really grapple with them. I'm curious, because power is such a loaded term, right? It's a loaded theme, and it's plays out in our congregations in very, quiet ways, like ways that we don't always notice. So I'd like for you to talk a little bit more about that one or other themes, but particularly power. Like, what about that kind of got your butterflies going, and how did you decide to address that?
For me, it began with framing power as being something that can be a commodity. This is all in the Theological Reflection. It's page 234. As clergy, or as religious professionals, again, Becky and I met in seminary. We are trained to be aware of our power and to define it in different ways. And I think that sometimes is lacking. Just if you're a Unitarian Universalist who might come to church and be active, you don't necessarily get to reflect on that. So we wanted to lift up power, not just the notion of power over as a commodity where there's one supply and the more I get, the less you have, but the connective power that we need to get through life. And the more I use my connective power, the more I'm inviting it forth in you. So that, and then as I mentioned earlier, the sub-theme was also less about necessarily power in relationships, but we also focused on what it means to really pay attention and the power of paying attention or being present. That it's not always the grand gestures. It's sometimes one of my favorite quotes about, uses the name God. God loves showing up in the space between people. And I think our power chapter is full of stories that make that evident. Becky?
Yeah, that's well put. I think for me, one of the really crucial things about in terms of talking about power and understanding power is understanding our own power. That I have power, and if I feel like I don't have power, I need to reanalyze why I think that. Because if I feel powerless, then I'm not being responsible with the power I actually have. And I think that comes into play, obviously, in all sorts of issues of oppression and all sorts of things. As a white woman, I've been called in the last several years to really examine that and look at it in a totally different way than how I was taught to look at it as I was growing up. And so any work that we do to really have an honest look at the power we have, why we have it, and how we can be in relationship with people to use it responsibly and or reallocate it, is so important. These are conversations I think we really, really need to have. So I guess that was where my thinking was in the chapter.
I think ironically, not ironically, fittingly, we took a couple of big risks in the Power chapter regarding what Becky's talking about, which is working with trying to recognize our privilege and power in centering the wisdom of people of color, and knowing that we might not, that we are not always graceful when we try to do that. But we spent a long time, we had discovered a telling of the Guadalupe story, Juan Diego Meets the Queen of Heaven. I had discovered one years ago, written by an anonymous person of color. And we spent a long time tracking her down and talking with her and having conversations with her about this book. Because, for example, we thought it's a story that we wanted to invite people to know more about, but we knew it was not appropriate for us as white people raised in the United States to tell the story in our own words. So Dr. Isabel Lagarda gave us her permission, and we had many conversations with her about it. And Becky did a similar thing with the religious literacy piece, which we haven't even talked about, working with Leslie Murdoch, with Becky, do you want to talk about this? Just and how we, even as we were writing about power, we were wrestling with it and holding it tenderly?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I want to be brief because I know that we're short on time, but the religious literacy sections are tricky and not easy. And I still have questions about how that ends up in the book. I feel good about them being in the book. I feel good about consulting with all the wonderful people who very generously gave their time. Abi Janamachi, Dr. Glenn Thomas Rideout, people who very generously went over things with us and to make sure that we were being as responsible as we can about the different focuses that we had. But I learned a lot, and I hope that folks who read the book will learn a lot and treat that information and those experiences responsibly. Cultural misappropriation is a really challenging thing. And so we want to walk that line carefully between education and understanding things better, and yet not stealing things. So it's a challenge, but I learned a lot.
We have about 5 minutes left. Do either of you want to talk about maybe the themes in the next book? And exciting, you're already working on volume 2. We'd love to hear that if you are willing.
Well, one thing I want to be sure to mention for folks before we talk about that is we have a website, sparksofwonder.com. And one of the things you'll find on the website, to get back to this conversation of how do you use the book, is there's a section that's just about sparks. And if you're looking at, I don't know, will this work for my congregation? You can click on the different sections under About Sparks, and it will give you like really brief synopses of all the stories and all the worship services and all that stuff. I think if you schmie around on the website, sparksofwonder.com, there's a lot of really great stuff there, including some like a free download of the guide for families so you can check it out to see if maybe it would be appropriate for your congregation before you buy the book. Anyway, and we had some bonus content on that site too, some things, some social media resources. If your congregation is doing those themes, they can download like cards for Facebook, things like that. So I want to be sure to mention that. Erika, you want to talk about themes in the next book? Do you remember? It's a list.
I do, but what I was going to say is that Becky and I aren't going to sit down to finish writing it and for 4.5 weeks. So if we're still open, but we've already actually written a lot of content. The next 5 themes are courage. We don't know about the order yet. Courage, repair, struggle, prayer, and bodies, our bodies.
Beautiful. this
Those
has
are
been
awesome. Oh my gosh.
so awesome. And it's a really excellent resource. And go to the website, buy the book. Becky, do you consult as well? I'm just curious about, do you have like a consulting?
Sure. You got a job?
I will be transitioning also. I read your bio from from working in a power setting to consulting. So we will
We'll
talk.
talk.
Thank you all so much. This was just a rich, beautiful conversation. Next week on The View, we will be talking about the fifth principle, the right of conscience, and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and society at large. I imagine it will be a interesting, may or may not be controversial conversation about what that means.
We'll do our best to make it a controversial conversation about what that
We don't even have to try. That just happens. So thank you all so much. Have a wonderful week.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for all your leadership.
Oh, thank you. Oh, it still says live, so we can't talk shit yet. Somebody's going to send an email complaining about that. I do that every time. Are we still